Hey everybody. So I recently launched an HTML game on Steam called Wilderplace. And I'm going to talk about technically how it works, and then discuss some of the benefits and limitations of the approach I took. Yeah, there's some stuff that's very unconventional about this game, so excited to dig into some of that. Yeah, my main goal when I started this project was just to make a game completely from scratch. I wanted to learn how games were made, and I was excited to make a bunch of mistakes and figure out why everybody uses Unity. Yeah, so I started with a totally blank page, and I'm also an artist, so I just started drawing. Like, what is a game? What's like an experience I want to have? Like, okay, you're moving on a grid. How do we think about like building a game that maybe feels like a roguelike, tactical roguelike, but I'm really interested in games that don't rely on violence to solve problems. So that was kind of my starting point. And I just kind of like built from there. A lot of time working on paper. And then I would sort of like go from paper and then into like start prototyping something in code a little bit back and forth. But a lot of the design process was just driven by like, you know, me wanting to like be uncompromising with some sort of visual direction. I let everything follow that. Yeah, so let's just play the game. We can start a new game. We got some little cutscenes at the start. There you go, your little shaman. You can find butterflies if you're patient. So it's a turn-based puzzle game. It's isometric. Everything is hand-drawn, so pencil on paper. And the kind of like unique aspect to this game is that most of the puzzles revolve around. I just pulled open my dev tools here. We're gonna like skip to some random level. Sure. Most of the, I need to give myself powers, otherwise I'll die. Okay. Most of the puzzles revolve around understanding and responding to the other entities that you encounter in the garden. Everybody sort of like has their own reason for being here. Like there's a little toad man up there, and there's like an attack drone down there. And as a shaman, you're mostly just trying to like make your way through the forest, bringing balance and curing animals. This level doesn't have any animals, but we died. Okay, let's jump to like another random level real quick. Yeah, here's like an early level. But a lot of the game is like you have these little spirits, and then you can basically seal them away into an obstacle like a tree. And then once you do that, the board is cleared and you move on. Yeah, there's no game engine. It's like a lot of high resolution graphics and this isometric grid. The audio is all runtime synthesized. The full gamepad support. And it's 100% HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So it's the same stuff you'd use to make an e-commerce website. And we get 60 frames per second performance. It's pretty cool. I'm gonna like run through technically, this is like high level stuff. We're not, you can barely see what's in this diagram. But one of the things is like, how do you take a web page and release it as a game on Steam? Well, there's actually really good tooling. So I automated that whole process. So I can push a git tag to GitHub, and then there's a GitHub action that automatically publishes to Steam, which is really nice. So we use Electron. We're taking the JavaScript source code, we're bundling that up with the Chrome browser, and then the actual game that you download from Steam is just packaged up Chrome alongside a little bit of JavaScript that runs the game. And so how does the actual game engine work? Well, you got user input. And this is like really just me thinking like, how do people code games? I'm not sure. I read a little bit about it here and there. But I was like, what's a game loop? I don't think I need one of those. And so I did write a game without a game loop. So basically everything works with like an action queue, which is like a big stack of potential things that are going to update the game state. The first thing in the action queue when you move a gamepad is like, all right, player move up. And then once that player move up action enters the queue, we're able to establish a bunch of other actions that need to happen based on the current state of the game. Like maybe there's a drone somewhere on the level, so we know that drone is going to have to move. And so you basically create this queue of things that happen. Maybe you're going to find an item on the board, and then that's going to trigger its own animation and maybe some dialogue. But every user input kind of like begins this action queue, and then some of the actions might push new actions into the queue. And so, yeah, we take the top action off the action queue. So an action might be player move, and then that's going to move a player from one position to the next. And then we got like functional reactive programming, which is like what everybody does on the web, and it's great. And so we take that state update of the player position, and then we know to automatically run an animation and maybe trigger some other things in response. The one thing that's like not very functional reactive here is that there is this idle flag that's like to tell the game to pause and wait for an animation to happen. I haven't figured out how to incorporate animations directly into my queue yet, but eventually I'd like to do that. But anyways, I guess the point is here, I'm using React to render, and we're using the DOM. So there's no canvas, there's no WebGL, I'm not even using SVG here. It's just a bunch of divs. So anyone like know what the DOM is? Yeah, like, okay, a lot of people. Yeah, that's good, right. Okay, let's just really quick look at Wilderplace again. I've got 7 minutes left. I'm gonna open up the dev tools. So yeah, so you can see it's just a bunch of divs, really. And it is 60 frames per second, right? Like you can see every once in a while we might have a frame drop here and there. But yeah, it pretty much works. Okay, that's all I wanted to show. Okay, so why use DOM to render a game? I mean, like you get really good UI and text rendering, like better than anything else. Developer experience is really good. Like Chrome DevTools are awesome. You have responsive design. I wrote one game with one code base, and that game runs on your phone and on your computer and on Steam Deck. That's super cool. It has touch support as well as gamepad support and keyboard and mouse. Like the accessibility features on the web are super mature. If I wanted to make my game support people with limited vision, like I'd be able to do that using the ARIA specification. And you can get really fancy without needing to dig into WebGL, using 3D transforms and CSS layer effects, and then SVG filters. So you can see right now the screen is like kind of wiggling right now. That's actually an SVG displacement map that I'm using here on a animation cycle. So yeah, and you can get 60 frames per second animation within limits. I mean, this is not a physics sandbox game. It's like a little turn-based puzzle game showing off, like, okay, here we've got 500 entities. They're all a bunch of divs, and each one has its own animation, and they're all running. And so this might be a little slower than it would be on my computer because we do have 2 monitors here. But we're going to start adding stuff. You see you lose some frames, actually, when we create a bunch of new nodes. But I should get 60 frames per second up to like, maybe 6,000 divs or so. With CSS, you have 3D. And it's even doing proper Z ordering and stuff like that, which is pretty cool. And then you can imagine instead of, okay, anyways, my images are not rendering. Maybe it's because, anyway, each of these is supposed to have a little image in it, like a little raster image. And then we can compare this to like Canvas, which is designed for this sort of thing. With Canvas, you're going to get 60 frames per second up to like 15,000 entities. So you can see, like, you're dealing with some pretty harsh limits if you're trying to design a game using the DOM. But so many games can be made within those limits. And really all you need are divs. Okay. Yeah, so, and the web can do everything. You know, TypeScript is like a serious good language. V8's really fast. You can use WebAssembly if you need to, but then like you might as well just use Unity if you're doing that. Some of the modern web-based game engines like Play Canvas or Construct are like really impressive. So I think the web is like a very serious platform for designing games in 2022. It's pretty cool. Yeah, like all the tooling, the front-end tooling for JavaScript is like really, really good. Like you get hot reloading. You know, you never have to wait for anything to compile ever, right? Like you make a change to the game and it's instantly updated without refreshing your browser. And there are modern browser APIs to cover everything you need. You got Gamepad API. There's a web audio API for doing synthesized audio that we're using. So we use a audio worker. So all our audio is being done in a worker thread in parallel to the main thread. Multi-threading's widely supported on the web now. You can do like really good networking. There's even disk access APIs on the web now. So if you need to cache stuff to disk, it's straightforward to release cross-platform. Like releasing for Windows versus releasing for Windows, Linux, and Mac is no different. That's really nice. Xbox supports HTML5 games. I haven't looked into this too much, but I kind of am interested in it. And then you can use. There's a bunch of tools to take a web page and turn it into a mobile app if you want to do that. So there are like huge disadvantages to this approach. Number one, you need a browser. Like to play Wilderplace on Steam, it's like a 300 megabyte download. 270 of that is just Google Chrome. Kind of silly. And that's an overhead that you'd have to deal with no matter where you release the game. There's like modern packaging tools that are going to give you the native web render on different platforms, but then you're suddenly dealing with that problem of like needing to support multiple browsers, and every browser has its own quirks, so that comes with its own issues. But like performance of the web, even if you're using something like Play Canvas, you're not going to be able to compare to native game engines. Like there's just overhead that you have to deal with. Like multi-threading works, but it's like there's a lot of cost to serializing and things like that. It's like JavaScript's not great at it. It's pretty much impossible to release on Switch. I haven't looked into PlayStation, but all signs say that's also really hard. But Switch is not going to support web-based games. People have done it with like crazy black magic and taken like 2 years. And then again, like there's just not really a community. There aren't a lot of tutorials. If you're not like already a programmer who can like write JavaScript in their sleep or whatever, I think it's pretty hard to probably make a game on the web. And the web-based game engines are starting to get good, but it's not Unity or Unreal. Yeah. So what's next for me? I'm making more web-based games, and just continuing to animate divs. And there's lots of things that I want to do to start optimizing this approach. Like I'm not really relying too much on multi-threading in Wilderplace, for example. Pretty much everything is main thread. But I think like a better approach is to basically save your main thread for animation and then do like all your game logic in a worker. I need to figure out how to do more reactive animation, which is just something that I'm like been thinking about. And I think that the optimal approach is probably a combination of the DOM with Canvas for effects and things like that. So if you need like lots of small elements or small animations, probably like bring in a canvas. You could even create a canvas and then destroy it once the animation's done, most likely. Other approaches to just like starting to scale up web games, like spatial partitioning. Wilderplace is pretty simple, like the individual levels, never more than like 15 by 15 grid, but there's no reason why I couldn't have a really massive grid and just show maybe a couple thousand things in the viewport at a time. So excited to like start to push this approach to making games further, and like every single foolish indie game enthusiast, I want to make it an engine eventually. Okay, yeah, so that's what I want to talk about. You can make games with the DOM, and it works fine. Check Wilderplace out on Steam, and follow me on Twitter, Saman BB.
Questions?
Jordan.
Yeah, so in your game, you talked a lot about 60 FPS, and I'm an MLG Gamer Pro, so I want to be at 144 FPS for my 144 hertz monitor. Is that possible?
Well, I mean, I have no idea. I'm like one of those weirdos. It's like, yeah, 30 frames per second's fine, you know. So, probably not. Yeah.
Two quick questions. One, can you show off the dev tools that you made yourself for the game?
Sure.
And the second question is, did you consider releasing it just as a website?
I did, but I was like, I could sell it.
Yeah, can't monetize.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I wanted to go through that process of releasing like a commercial game just to see what it's like. I think that's the main reason why I ended up using the approach I did. Yeah, my background is in basically building tools. Like that's kind of like what my career was before making games. So like building UIs is like, it's like what I spent so much time making this thing. Right. So here we can like add a drone and like drag it around, right? And then we can play the level, right? And then there's an update server running in the background that's saving those changes to disk. And there's like a big world map where all the levels fit together. So these, I can move the levels around. Like good tools to like rotate levels. That's like, what else? I have a script tool because towards the end we had to write all this dialogue and like make sure that things are happening in the right sequence, and there's some stuff that's non-linear. So what I did is like just took all of the dialogue from the entire game state and dumped it into this editor. So this is the whole script of the game, top to bottom, and it's editable. So just because I built the tool myself, I could really easily add new features to it. So if I needed to solve a problem like, hey, it's really hard to keep track of, make sure that the dialogue is like ordered, and when we make a change to the story that is consistent across the whole game, I was like, oh, I'll just build an editor that's designed for doing that. And so that's what this is here. It's like a dialogue editor, and as you make changes here, it'll save to the correct board.
Thank you.
Jet.
Are there any games that you're thinking about making right now that you could not make with this engine?
I mean, anything like 3D, basically.
Okay.
You know, anything like, you know, there's lots of stuff you couldn't do.
But like, of the ones that you're considering making?
Me?
If you're considering making a second game?
Yeah, I think I kind of like enjoy those constraints, you know.
Yeah.
But like the game I just played over the last couple of weeks, because I got a Steam Deck. Besides playing Wilderplace on Steam Deck, I just finished Sable, and that game's like so beautiful and amazing. And like, of course, you would just use a game engine if you want to make something like that. It would be silly to try to. It's probably doable, but it would be, you know, it'd be silly. Yeah. Yeah.
What's the like story mythos, or as much of that as you can reveal?
Yeah, what's the game actually about? So there's this garden that has fallen into disrepair. There's spirits running amok, you know. It's kind of like rooted in this idea of animism, you know, that your sickness is caused by spiritual imbalance. So you have some spirit in you that needs to be exercised out. And so this garden's fallen into disrepair. There's a bunch of loose spirits everywhere causing trouble. And the founders of the garden called for help. So they called for a shaman to come to the garden, and your job is to bring balance back to the garden. And you do that by collecting spirits and then sealing them away. And then once you've done that in a grove, you can move on to the next grove. And so the main mythos is this is like a divine garden created by the gods as a perfect sanctuary free of chaos. And it started to fall apart. And you're trying to figure out what the source of the imbalance is. And meanwhile, you're kind of on this mission from the gods to fix up their garden. And then there's a bunch of like twists and turns, and there's some, at a certain point, you can make some decisions around, you know, whether you kind of like, whether you think the gods are right or whether the garden needs to go in a different direction.
I'm curious if you, it seems like you're very experienced web developer. I'm curious, was this rooted in like, I want to see if I can build a game, or like using, in React, or was it like, I think I can do this faster? I guess like,
It was the second thing.
yeah.
I was like, I'm looking at what I want to do here, and like I know I can do all these things using the web. So I was like, why don't I just use what I know? Yeah.
So do you think, I guess, a comparable game in an engine, Unreal or Unity, would that take similar amounts of time? Like, how much of it is
Maybe it'd be less fun though, you know. As like I'm a control freak designer, so like it's really fun to just be able to build everything myself. Yeah. Up front.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm just curious what your puzzle/level design process is like. Did you write it down on paper first, or did you? I mean, I've played the game enough that I know that like some of the interactions can be pretty non-obvious.
Yep.
Maybe not visible on paper.
Yeah. So I designed a version of this game that was really short and really hard. And I would like play test it, and then people would be like, I don't even know what's happening in this game. And so then I decided to get help. So actually, most of the puzzles are designed by somebody else, Tom Lubanovic, who's been an old friend of mine who I've just like always known to be amazing at puzzle games. Like he's like, beats the witness without looking up any tutorials or anything like that. And he was giving me really good feedback on the game. And I was like, Tom, why don't you just design the levels for me? And so we started working together. So Tom really led the way on a lot of level design. I'd say I kind of like played a creative director role, where I kind of knew the story I wanted to tell, and I knew the types of interactions I wanted to make happen. And then Tom would find a way to make sure that there's a decent learning curve and things like that. All right, yeah, thanks everybody.